Vitali, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Now I've invited Faisal Islam into the studio, a BBC economics editor, because I want him to reveal something that I think is going to become a big factor in the budget and the speculation about the budget. Hello, Faisal.
Hello.
And this is a word beginning with P that sounds really boring, but is incredibly important, and it's productivity.
Indeed.
Now, before we discuss its importance, just tell us this concept of what productivity in the economy actually is.
It's measured in a couple of different ways, but essentially it's the amount of growth, output, increase in the size of the economy you get measured per person, per hour worked. There's various other metrics, but it gives you, if you like, a measure of how efficient the economy is. And the importance of it is that it becomes the best way to improve overall growth in the economy and also living standards at the same time.
It's one of the big drivers of economic growth. I mean, one of the other drivers is like new technology or trade deals.
Because it feeds in.
Yeah.
So both of those things that you mentioned are captured by having a more productive economy.
Yeah.
So, for example, remember the old Brexit economic warning documents from George Osborne all those years ago, 10 years ago? They were about more trade barriers, lowering productivity, lower investment, lowering productivity. That was the essence of the long, and that still is in the OBR's calculation of Brexit. Likewise, I think when you look at what determines productivity, you're absolutely right. It's investment in capital. We used to think that was like machines, and now it's all about tech.
But why is this issue of productivity rearing its head in like a really big way, or about to now?
Because your assumption about whether productivity, its long-term path, whether that is constant, whether it has fallen, whether it rises, determines your assumption about where the economy, how fast the economy is going to grow over 5 to 10 to 15 years. And when you're calculating forecasts for the size of the gap in the public finances, the deficit or the debt, this becomes critical and almost has more of a year-to-year impact or as much of a year-to-year impact as the individual decisions made on spending or on taxation. And what's happening now is actually perhaps the reverse of what I've just said, which is the extent to which an assumption about our productivity being lower than what we had thought or what the OBR had thought determines that therefore the gap in the public finances, and that gap is measured against Rachel Reeves' self-imposed rules on borrowing, becomes bigger and substantially so, and requires filling in some way and a set of decisions that she otherwise wouldn't have had to take.
Well, yeah, and just to flash that out, because I went back to the OBR document that came out with the budget in the spring, and they basically say they've got two scenarios for like, one is lower productivity growth, and they say that if the economy follows that scenario, by 2029, 2030, it then is sort of 3.2% lower than they thought it might have been. And that ultimately means that the government receives in revenue per year by the end of this decade, £51.5 billion less than they thought they were going to.
Yeah. So small percentage points compounded over years and years and years lead to these large gaps. Now, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but then you look at their higher productivity growth scenario, and they say, well, actually, if it ends up being 1.3% higher by the end of the decade than they were thinking, then actually you would have a surplus of £16.3 billion, like £16.3 billion extra to play with.
And so the critical judgment the OBR is making now is whether now several years of lower than expected growth is underpinned by essentially there having been lower productivity as a consequence of a variety of things, a sort of hangover from the financial crisis, the low investment generally at a time of political uncertainty. There's a bit of Brexit in there. There's a bit of prime ministers and chancellors, changing every week in there too. There are some changes to migration levels, for example, that also factor into all of this stuff. And here's the sort of central issue at stake right now, and we're talking right now. In the next 7 to 9 days, the Treasury will find out. Other forecasters have downgraded their assumptions about underlying productivity in the UK, and therefore what will go over 5-10 years into the future. So were the OBR to catch up with that, it could lead to a 10, 15, 20 billion gap in those public finance targets that the Chancellor says are non-negotiable. Now they're making that judgment right now. We're waiting, or I say we,